Cool. Hi everyone. This is Akshat Saxena again, senior member SBS DepSoc. The reason why I mentioned Pratyush Chakravarti's name in the slide is because when Pratyush was in his second year and when I was a fresher, Pratyush took a session on structure of an argument, which was quite like that was one of the most important, possibly the most important sessions in our entire training schedule and things like that. And I still rewatch that session even though I'm in my third year, and I still take away something new each time I watch that 2 घंटा 2.5 घंटा का session. You can find it on YouTube. Uh, Obviously, like you can, I think someone sent the YouTube channel ka link on ClownSock, so obviously you can watch whatever you want on our YouTube channel whenever you want. But we also have a schedule, and the reason why we still take sessions on our own is because uh, अपना लाइव सेशन देने में अलग बात होती है. You can have doubts and clear those doubts साथ साथ and things like that. ठीक है. And anyway, it's fun to learn live than to learn through a recording. But you can obviously watch those recordings also. Much of this workshop and presentation is basically a recreation of past sessions taken by Pratyush. He took this session twice in the last 2 years. Now I'm taking it. But the reason why I mentioned his name is because mostly unhi ka hai sab kuch. There's just a few tweaks that I've made in terms of the examples I use. And मतलब इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि तुम ये वर्कशॉप छोड़ दो, ऐसी बात नहीं है. I'll explain things in a different way than what he did. I'll use different examples which are probably more comfortable for me as well as probably for some of you also. Um, so yeah, that's why I have mentioned his name also as a tribute. Pratyush, if you ever watch this, I hope aap khush ho. And if you stay by the end of this workshop and you focus on this workshop अच्छे से, then Pratyush would be happy. Cool. उससे पहले जो डिबेट हमने भेजी थी, कितने जनों ने देखी? चैट में यस लिखो. Adarsh, what's a half yes? Can you unmute and explain that?
पूरा नहीं देख पाया मैं लाइक
अच्छा,
आधे घंटे का देखा बस.
चलो ठीक है, ठीक है.
आधे घंटे.
फेयर. ठीक है. दिस वाज जस्ट टू टाइम पास थोड़ा सा, बट इफ यू हैवंट वॉच्ड, फर्स्टली ठीक है, एक बार हो गया, बट आगे से व्हेन वी टेल यू टू डू समथिंग, प्लीज डू समथिंग, बिकॉज आज आई विल in my workshop use certain arguments from that debate to explain some concepts. So if you haven't watched that debate, then you might face some difficulty in understanding those concepts. Obviously I'll try to explain the thing without that example also, but अगर आपने वो debate देखी है तो आपका मेरा वो specific example और अच्छे से समझ आ जाएगा. So that's basically the thing. Okay, so starting with the workshop. So this workshop is basically about structure of an argument, and borrowing Pratyush ke words here, this is possibly the most important workshop that you'll ever have in our entire training schedule. Not that the other ones are not as important, but that this one is especially important and forms the fundamental like thinking process that you need to have in your case preps when you get the motion, how you structure your thinking and how you think about your cases and basically run arguments in debate rooms. Also कैमरा काफी कम खोले हैं भाई, क्या हो गया? थोड़े और खोल लो यार. Okay, so firstly what is an argument, right? पहले तुम में से कोई बताओ what is an argument. Just unmute and start speaking. पिछले सेशन में भी इन शॉर्ट डिस्कस किया था हमने.
Opinion or a statement in favor of some topic.
Okay. और कोई? मतलब not saying this was wrong, just asking others. एक ने unmute किया बस.
Like presenting your views on some in favor of something or in opposition of something.
Fair. Yep. ठीक है. So you're on the right lines. So an argument, as discussed in a previous session, arguments are basically reasons why you should support something or oppose something. So the most important thing is why. Why is the question that the why is the eternal question that you will ask in debating till the point that you're involved in the activity. Why should you support a motion? Why should you oppose a motion? If the motion is that this house would ban drugs, why is it a good policy to ban drugs? Why is it not a good policy to ban drugs? अगर गव कह रहा है कि X will lead to Y, as op you will question why will X lead to Y? Why cannot it lead to something else? So why is the most important question in debating, and why is basically argument. That why do you support something? Why do you oppose something? So Savya and Kritika, thank you for answering. You were majorly right. You were right basically. So yeah, cool. So these are like today's session has thankfully less slides. I only have 5 slides. I think जिनमें से एक तो यही थी introduction वाली. So not much info dumping on you, but the more time that we're going to spend is in discussing those few slides in detail with examples, so that the concepts you that I'm trying to explain are concrete in your mind and तुम आगे याद रखो उन चीजों को and वैसे ही सोचो. Cool. So first thing, what constitutes an argument? So there are different ways of structuring an argument. Uh, there are different models in which debaters or like coaches teach people to make arguments. The most famous and the most useful of which is this one: idea, analysis, evidence. So these are the 3 parts of an argument. So there are there are different ways. One is the now action then model, which says that it majorly works in policy debate. So like you first step is you tell what is happening right now. The second step is you tell what is the action that you're taking, and the then part is, which is the third part, is what will happen after that action and why that's better. That's probably one way you can look at an argument. Or there are some other ways in which you can frame arguments, different apply to different cases. But this idea, analysis, evidence, this is the structure that most debaters find the easiest to understand and applies in almost all cases in any argument, whether you make a principled argument, whether you make a practical argument, and things like that. What do I mean by this structure? So, and I don't mean that you have to follow this is not a set in stone structure, but this is just the best practice that we found through trial and error, and most debaters in the world have found, which is why this is the thing that we teach people when we teach people what an argument is, what is the structure of an argument. So the first thing is the idea. Idea basically means what is the idea of your argument. Basically अगर आप कोई argument बनाते हो, आप उसको एक headline देते हो कि this is the reason why we support a motion. So that headline or the set of 4 to 5 words or that one line is basically your idea. What is your analysis? Analysis is the content that you say to prove that idea. अगर मेरा argument है कि X policy will lead to more employment, my analysis, so that is my idea that X will lead to more employment. Analysis would mean that what are the different ways or the mechanisms in which X policy will lead to more employment. What ऐसा क्या कर देती है X policy जिससे कुछ effect पड़ता है due to which employment increases. So just me proving that idea or proving that this something will happen, all of that is analysis. Me proving my idea is what I mean by analysis. Evidence, which this is the third part of an argument. So evidence basically is you showing a real life example or a real life mirroring of the same idea and analysis that you proved in the real world. Which means that अगर मैं कह रहा हूँ कि X policy leads to more employment, I have analyzed things by saying that I have analyzed sufficiently, given proof of why this is likely to lead to more employment. My evidence would look like if a similar kind of policy was passed in a certain country and that country had more employment, I would point to that example and tell that, listen, this is a scenario where the idea and analysis that I talked about actually works in the real world. So this is the evidence of my idea and analysis. So this is basically the basic structure of an argument. Okay. So this was just me talking about the theory of the structure. Now let's take an example. Okay. Example can act as evidence, yes. So evidence constitutes a lot of things. It can, like, it can include statistics, it can include examples, it can include case studies. Mostly people use examples and case studies and things like that because they are better able to show that certain things are similar in this situation that we're talking about in our argument, and they led to the same impacts that we are talking about, and therefore this evidence can be that proof that our argument actually is true or actually works in the real world as well, and things like that. So examples mostly do act as an evidence. Okay. So let's take an example. You can see a motion in this on the screen. The motion states that this house regrets the glorification of democracy. For your understanding, the burden in a regrets motion on gov. So मैं full लिख देता हूँ. I don't know if you know the full form. Regrets the glorification of democracy. This is the full motion. In a this house regrets motion, the burden on gov is to say that a word, if the motion is this house regrets X, then gov will say that a world without X would have been a better world than the status quo that we live in. The status quo is one where X exists. Gov would say that ऐसी दुनिया जिसमें X नहीं होता, वो दुनिया इस दुनिया से better होती. This is what you mean by regret. When you regret something, you basically mean that this shouldn't have happened, right? So this is basically what a regret motion means. So if I'm saying this house regrets the glorification of democracy, as Gov, I need to prove that a world where glorification of democracy did not happen would have been a better world. Op would say that no, a world where democracy wasn't glorified would be a worse world, and glorification of democracy is a good thing. Okay. This is basically what you need to do in a this house regrets motion, just in short. So if I am on gov in this motion, just a second. If I'm on gov in this motion, okay. So first thing in idea, the idea is basically your argument, as I already explained, right? What is an argument? Why do you need to support or oppose a motion? In this particular motion, I would think, acha, theek hai, I am gov, I need to regret the glorification of democracy. In the idea stage, my mind should go in the direction कि why is the glorification of democracy being regretted? ऐसी क्या बुरी चीज है glorification में जो कि इतनी बुरी है कि हमें उसे regret करना चाहिए? By the way, glorification में किसी को doubt तो नहीं है तो unmute कर दो. I'll explain happily. ठीक है, even if नहीं है मैं explain कर देता हूँ for the benefit of everyone. Glorification means pedestalization or putting something on a pedestal as opposed to others, or wahwahi of democracy, that oh, democracy is the best form of government and sabse badhiya hai, and kind of that is what we mean by glorification of democracy. You put it on a pedestal, you give it extra value कि democracy अच्छी चीज है and things like that. ठीक है, that is what we mean by glorification of democracy. On idea, my idea needs to come from thinking why is glorification being regretted. Suppose मेरा idea है कि glorification of democracy, like in the status quo where democracy is glorified, it becomes difficult to think about the loopholes or the problems existing within democracy, and it becomes difficult to call them out or solve them. So suppose ये मेरा idea है कि glorification leads to difficulty in solving loopholes in democracy, because democracy is also not perfect, right? Every form of government has its own pros and cons. So if you glorify democracy, it leads to difficulty of in calling out its problems or criticizing the loopholes that still exist in democracy. For example, this is my idea. Now, if I'm saying A leads to B, at the analysis stage, which is the second stage, I need to analyze in depth as to why I think or why I'm saying that A leads to B. So, for example, I would say that in analysis, I can probably say a couple of things. One, अगर आप डेमोक्रेसी को ग्लोरीफाई कर देते हो, दिस मीन्स दैट यू थिंक दैट दिस इज द बेस्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट एंड दिस इज द मोस्ट सुपीरियर फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट, विच मीन्स दैट जहाँ पे भी डेमोक्रेसी है आप उसको बाय डिफॉल्ट अच्छा कंट्री या अच्छा गवर्नमेंट मान लेते हो. दिस मीन्स दैट यू बाय डिफॉल्ट don't or are less incentivized to look at acha, even if democracy hai, what are the problems that still exist in this democracy or in this country and things like that. So this, if absent this glorification, probably you would have been more critical of this democracy. or अगर बाकी like democracy, monarchy, dictatorship सब एक ही लेवल पे होते, सबको एक समान माना जाता एंड डेमोक्रेसी को इतना ज्यादा सुपीरियर ना माना जाता, पॉसिबली आप डेमोक्रेसी के लिए भी उतना ही क्रिटिकल होते जितना आप एनार्की कह रहा हूँ, मोनार्की और डिक्टेटरशिप के लिए हो, विच मीन्स यू वुड बी एबल टू क्रिटिसाइज डेमोक्रेसी मोर. बट बिकॉज ये ग्लोरिफिकेशन एग्जिस्ट करता है एंड हम हमेशा से सुनते आए दैट डेमोक्रेसी इज द बेस्ट फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट एटसेट्रा, देयर इज मोर लाइकलीहुड दैट आप डेमोक्रेसी की कमियों को या जो भी उसके फॉल्ट्स हैं उनको नजरअंदाज कर दोगे और या उन पे इतना ध्यान नहीं दोगे, या यू विल बी क्रिटिकल ऑफ दोस, यू विल नॉट बी एज क्रिटिकल ऑफ दोस फॉल्ट्स. This is on an individual level. What happens on a societal level? This is the second thing I can say in analysis. I can say, and दूसरी side might say कि नहीं, you can still be critical of democracy. अगर आपको लगता है कि faults हैं आप कह सकते हो. But I can say on a societal level, if we as a society believe that democracy should be glorified, or if we as a society glorify democracy, this means that अगर 100 लोग ऐसे हैं जो कि glorify करते हैं डेमोक्रेसी को एंड दे नजरअंदाज द फॉल्ट्स ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी, if the 101st person turns out to be this one person who is still critical of democracy even in the current world, and they speak out about the ills of democracy or what the loopholes are or what the criticisms of democracy still exist in the current world, even if they are able to speak out their opinion, they can still be critical, sure. But what will happen is, because these people who are critical of democracy are so less in number, and the large majority in the current world believes that democracy में कुछ गलत नहीं है, democracy, they basically glorify democracy, the voices of the many will trump the voices of the few. They will not let the others' opinion gain itna traction, and basically the glorification wala opinion is the opinion that's gonna prevail. So even if ठीक है, as an individual you can probably even less likelihood है, because first argument में we've already talked about how glorification आपके मन में भी है, so you're anyway less likely to criticize. But even if आप individually criticize कर लो, there's less likelihood that that will lead to any change in society, or your criticism actually being uh, identified or recognized by society, that the society as a whole recognizes कि हाँ यार, this is still a problem with democracy and this is still something that we need to work on. It's highly unlikely that this will happen. जितना भी मैंने पिछले 2-3 मिनट बक किया, this was my analysis for proving the idea that glorification of democracy leads to difficulty in calling out its faults or loopholes and things like that. So this is the level of analysis that any argument requires or any idea requires for it to become a full-fledged argument. ठीक है? Whenever you think of arguments in the future, केवल idea से come up होना enough नहीं है. You also need to have analysis that proves that idea. Otherwise, the judge doesn't know why should I believe this idea that you're saying. So idea and analysis majorly completes an argument. Evidence is not always compulsory, but if you have evidence, that's obviously an addition, and it obviously increases the persuasiveness of an argument. ठीक है? So evidence भी आप दे सकते हो. And okay, Gaurav, do you have a question? Yep.
Yes, I have a question that can we give controversial or political examples as evidence?
What do you mean by controversial?
Like a particular example might be controversial in the real world. Can we give that example?
I still don't get the entire thing, but if you think it's a very sensitive issue or it can hurt someone in the debate room or someone's feelings or things like that, like if you think the example, if you say it in a way that becomes insensitive and it's not politically correct to say it that way, or like just in general, if you think that can hurt someone, best to not say it. अगर controversial आप थोड़ा अलग सेंस में बोलो तो many of the things that we debate in debating are controversial. I talked about a motion that this house would ban drugs. Most of us come from conservative family backgrounds जहाँ पे drugs का नाम भी लिया तो पिटाई हो सकती है, ठीक है? So if that is your definition of controversial, then तो debating में बहुत controversial चीजें discuss करेंगे, ऐसी बात नहीं है. But if it's the former, then tread carefully. Arfi, you have a question?
Yes, I was asking, like you said, the main idea is loopholes in democracy. So if I say that corruption during elections in democracy is more than in monarchy, anarchy, or any other form of government, so I will include it in analysis or in evidence.
You mean if you say these things in opposition?
No, if I say these things that glorification of democracy leads to corruption and all those things like unfair elections, and we neglect these things like like distribution of money and all those things during election. This happens generally in democracy. So I will include this argument in analysis or evidence.
Okay, so what you just said is a different argument. So my argument was glorification of democracy leads to uh, ignoring the loopholes of democracy. Your argument was glorification of democracy leads to corruption in elections and things like that. And जो भी और आपने बोला, that probably comes under the analysis part. So your main statement that glorification leads to corruption in elections, things like that, that probably would be a separate argument or a separate idea. Everything else that you said is probably analysis. However, I'm still unsure of whether glorification is the thing that leads to corruption. That is something that if you say in an actual debate, you'll have to analyze a lot more. Ki why exactly is glorification the unique thing that leads to corruption? उसको analyze करोगे आप, but just in terms of your question of whether this falls into idea or analysis, it falls in both because you framed a different argument in your question. So it has a different idea, it has a different analysis. So I hope that clears the question. Cool. Okay, moving forward. मैं कहाँ पे था? Evidence पे. So evidence आप दे सकते हो. Now let's talk about the importance of these things. So in any debate, idea is the most important thing for you to come in your mind. अगर आपके दिमाग में सही ideas नहीं आते हैं, then it's highly unlikely that you will win a debate. You'll gain this skill through time when you understand what are the different topics or areas where debates happen, what are the usual ideas जिनके बीच में clash होता है in debates. You'll understand and you'll get the hang of it in a few weeks or in a few months. But just the importance of ideas is the most out of all these three things. अगर आपका idea सही नहीं है, अगर आपका idea ही गलत है, then even if your analysis proves that idea or even if your evidence link like shows that this analysis works, because your idea is wrong, your whole argument turns out to be wrong. So idea is the most important thing in an argument. The second most important thing is analysis to that idea. आपका idea अगर आपने सही पकड़ लिया, that's good, that's the most important first step in the right direction. The next thing that you need to do is think of analysis or think of reasons why your idea is true. क्योंकि अगर आपका analysis नहीं है, I'll discuss other motions from both gov and op. ठीक है, इस पे भी थोड़ा सा कर सकता हूँ because मैं op का इतना सोचा नहीं है because I mainly wanted to show you how an argument looks like, which is why I only took the gov का stance. But ठीक है, op पे भी थोड़ा बात कर लेंगे short में, but you'll do gov op both of more motions in the future in further slides. But for now, just a second, I'll just complete this, then I'll take the question.
Oh.
So analysis is the second most important thing in your argument because analysis is the thing that proves that your idea is correct. Why is it the second most important, not the most important? Because if you have the correct idea, and suppose you have insufficient analysis or wrong analysis, and some opposition points it out, you can think of new analysis, or you can rebuild that analysis and say in the next speech कि देखो ये नया analysis, this again proves my idea. You still have some way of being saved in the debate. If your idea is wrong, then or the other side questions it, you you come with an entirely new idea. That is a very different, in that basically is an inconsistency in your case, कि आप पूरा केस एक लाइव पीएम में एलओ ने रिबट कर दिया आइडिया लेवल पे, अब डीपीएम में आप पूरा नया केस ला रहे हो. That's a fatal blow to your case. ठीक है, which is why analysis is second most important. Evidence is the least important out of all these things, because evidence is basically the only the example part of things, because even if evidence target ho jata hai, your idea still remains, your analysis still remains. So they've not dealt with the major chunk of your argumentation, but just the end का part की अच्छा example गलत हो गया, but my argument still stands, which is why evidence is the least important. It's still important, but among the three it's the least important. So that's how you need to look at the relative importance of all these three components of an argument. Okay, before moving to the next slide, opposition. So op can, just off the top of my head, these are not ideal arguments, but probably a direction of the debate from opposition can be that it firstly telling why democracy and the spread of democracy is important in the world or for many countries, and then explaining why the glorification of democracy is a force that has led to the democratization of multiple countries, or in a world where this glorification did not happen and democracy, monarchy, dictatorship, all of these were at the same pedestal, it would have been difficult to change the perceptions of people or of countries or of the world कि नहीं democracy अच्छी नहीं है, that people need to have a say in governance and things like that. These are important ideals that we hold in high regard, and to convince people of these ideals would have been different if you were so critical of democracy to begin with. So this world on balance would have been less democratic than the current world that we live in. Possibly that's one direction in which opposition can argue, and this is why glorification zaruri hai, so that democracy ka spread ho paye, because that's an inherent good for the world and things like that. That's possibly one line of argumentation that op can say. ठीक है, so this is from op. गव का argument मैं already discuss कर चुका हूँ. And also like ऐसा नहीं है कि एक argument बना दी तो वो बिल्कुल जीत ही जाएगी. Obviously there can be further responses to both these arguments in an actual debate. दोनों sides एक दूसरे को respond करेंगी, and it depends on the quality of analysis that both teams bring. That is the thing that decides which side wins the debate. So I am not on saying मैं तुमको सिर्फ एक perspective नहीं बता रहा हूँ. If you notice, I have given you arguments from both sides. This means that it's possible for you to make arguments of motions from both sides, and I'm just telling you how you can make them and things like that. Cool. Just a second. Krishna, did you have another question other than this? Because you raised your hand also.
No, भैया, no. That was
Okay.
the only question.
Cool. ठीक है. Let's move to the next slide. There are two prerequisites of a good argument. Whenever you make an argument to support or oppose a motion, there are two things that you need to keep highly in mind. One is truth, the other is relevance. So, what do I mean by truth? क्या आपका argument true है? Given the motion and given what your idea is your analysis, or are the reasons that you give me to believe that this idea is actually true, are they sufficient to make the judge believe or me believe कि what you're saying is actually true? The second thing is relevance. What do I mean by relevance? Relevance is हम किसी motion की बात कर रहे हैं, आपने प्रूव कर दिया कि एक आइडिया ट्रू है, you had good analysis to prove the truth of that idea. But is it relevant to this debate? Should I as a judge care about this outcome? आप कह रहे हो कि A will lead to B and B is a bad impact. But as a judge, do I have reason to believe that B is a bad impact? Or why should I care about this impact as opposed to other things that the other side might be saying? These are basically things, these are basically the two things that any good argument needs to have. ठीक है? This 45-degree line जो दिख रही है, this is where your argument should ideally be. Because if your argument is, एक second रुकना, if your argument is somewhere here जहाँ पे मेरा cursor है, I am hoping मेरा cursor दिख रहा है यहाँ पे, is it visible? Can someone say?
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
it's simple.
Okay, if my argument is somewhere here, so I am assuming graph पढ़ना आता है सबको, but अगर नहीं आता कोई बात नहीं. If my argument is here, it means that the argument is relevant, but it's not true. So for example, if I'm doing an economics debate, ठीक है, and I'm saying that this policy will lead to billions of people being unemployed. Now, an unemployment of billions of people of such a large scale is obviously a very relevant impact, that it harms so many people, and by default you should care about that impact. But is that impact true? Have I provided analysis to prove that actually billions of people will get unemployed as a result of this policy? No. At that point, this is not an ideal or a good argument, because even though it's relevant to the debate and the judge should care about it, I have given you no reason to believe that actually unemployment इतने large scale पे हो जाएगा. At which point an opposition can simply state that तुमने analysis नहीं दिया है, so this argument is relevant but not true. Bring analysis, then we'll deal with, bring both truth and relevance, then we'll deal with your argument. This is how truth of an argument matters. If, on the other hand, if my argument is somewhere here, this means that my argument is high in truth but low in relevance. So I say something like एक सेकंड सोचने दो इसके बारे में. अगर मैं ऐसा कोई आर्ग्यूमेंट बना रहा हूँ विच इज ट्रू एंड हो जाएगा, but it's the impact that it has is very marginal, or like very unrelated to the debate that we're having, or very unrelated to the major issues concerned in the debate or things like that. At that point I might have given analysis to prove that ठीक है जो मैं कह रहा हूँ वो होगा, but what I'm saying, if it is of low relevance, then the judge feels that अरे this is not that important of an impact even though this impact will happen, so I don't know how much I should care about this. The other team will simply say, the other team can outweigh this by saying that listen, these are the impacts that we talk about. Even though your impacts are true or your argument is true, our impacts or our argument are more important than your argument because तुम्हारा relevance कम है. This is how, even if an argument is true, they can tackle the relevance of that argument and therefore win over you. Which is why we say that your argument should be on this 45-degree line. It should have some degree of truth, it should also have some degree of relevance. Now your argument can't be at this end point of this 45-degree line, बहुत high वाला जो point है. The reason for this is that in our first workshop we discussed that there is no right and wrong. ठीक है? There is no objective right and wrong in debating. There is no right or wrong stance or side in debating. Both sides do have logical reasons to support or oppose a particular stance. अगर कोई argument hypothetically speaking इस point पे होता which has too much amount of truth and too much amount of relevance, that would be a perfect argument, which means that that is an unbeatable argument, which means that उसके response में कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता. इस लेवल की आर्ग्यूमेंट्स आपको डिबेटिंग में कम दिखेंगी. द रीजन बीइंग दैट अगर कोई ऐसा मोशन है या टॉपिक है जिसमें इस टाइप की आर्ग्यूमेंट बन सकती है विच इज completely true and completely relevant, then that becomes an unbeatable argument. This means that उस argument का कोई opposition नहीं है, which is why the most arguments that you will see will be somewhere in the middle here of in this portion of the 45-degree line. But the idea is, even though you can't reach a perfect argument, you from your own side need to do as much as you can to achieve the most that you can, both in terms of truth and in terms of relevant, so that तुम्हारा argument यहाँ नीचे कहीं ना हो कि truth भी कम है या relevance भी कम है, या फिर वो जो side वाले केस हमने discuss किए, your argument is somewhere here on the 45-degree line, somewhere in the middle. This is where most good debating arguments would lie. They would have a decent degree of truth proven because of analysis. They would have a decent degree of relevance proven by impacting and weighing that, okay, this is why this impact is important, or this is why you should care about this principle and things like that. And they would lie somewhere on the 45-degree line. So these are the two prerequisites of a good argument. Okay. Does anyone have any doubt for this or the previous slide? I'll just take a break.
You said like the idea and the analysis and the evidence. So like when we present an argument, all three should be there in an argument.
You absolutely need to have ideas, you absolutely need to have analysis. Insert, you can do away with evidence, it's not exactly important. So if you're in case prep, if you have formed an argument, don't fret too much, or uh, don't fret too much, or don't freak out कि अरे यार मेरे को इस argument का evidence नहीं मिल रहा है, how will I prove the real world uh, mirroring of this argument or things like that. That's not important, that's not that important कि आप उस पे panic हो जाओ. The more important thing is idea, the more important thing is analysis. Idea plus analysis makes a decent enough complete argument. Evidence is cherry on the cake. That's how you need to look at it. If you are
Okay.
not having analysis, or if you're not having idea, that's where it's fair for you to थोड़ा आ जाओ कि टेंशन में और पैनिक कि यार मेरे को तो कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा. That's understandable. But if you can't find evidence, that's not a problem. If you have 2 to 3 ideas in mind and 2 to 3 arguments, for example, and if you're stuck on the evidence part of the first argument, it makes more sense to use your time better and leave that for later, and go to the second argument and develop that ideas analysis, so that you can have two complete arguments instead of one fully formed argument and the next argument being incomplete because तुम्हारे पास case prep में time नहीं था उसको सोचने का. So that's the relative importance of the
And
components.
one more thing. So like for example, there's a topic or agenda basically where the government is introducing some kind of policy.
Hmm.
Just for example, the government has introduced UCC, and now so what will be the idea like? Idea,
Uniform Civil Code.
yes,
From which side?
the gov side, like or the opposite side. Like what? Like I just need a like good example of idea क्योंकि थोड़ा वो सवाल है.
सो किसी भी डिबेट में कोई भी आइडियाज हो सकते हैं, हम आगे और भी मोशंस डिस्कस करेंगे, बट जस्ट फॉर यूसीसी, यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड. सो
No.
यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड, फॉर पीपल हु डोंट नो, इज बेसिकली that all the communities and everyone should function on a uniform set of laws and codification and things like that, and different communities should not have different laws for themselves. For example, some religions have certain laws which they follow and things like that. So a UCC would trump those community level laws, and the people would be uh, working in accordance with the UCC and not in their religious laws, for example, and things like that. So the question that Savya asked is, what are the ideas that you can think in Gov and in Op if the motion of this house would implement UCC or things like that? On Gov, I think actually on Op, I would say that UCC as a policy is a blanket uh, policy and it trumps all other kinds of laws. I would state the importance of what what is the importance of these community level laws and how UCC as a move, the hidden agenda or the basic agenda of this move is uh, more to disenfranchise minorities or more to trump minorities and make their cultures or their laws irrelevant and things like that, and how it is a way to oppress their thing and control minorities ka behavior and things like that. Possibly that is what I would argue from Op. On Gov, what I would argue is uh, a UCC does, I think Gov is relatively simple in this motion. A UCC would mean that uh, you don't have to deal with unfair practices that some religions might have. And yeah, fundamental rights, basically that. And if you are under UCC, then you can question them, or you have a certain legal more legal power to like ask for your fundamental rights, or keep your fundamental rights safe and things like that. That the minorities within the minorities, for example, there is a minority religion, but there are women within that minority religion who are oppressed, possibly because of a religious law. In the event of a UCC, a UCC gives more power to those double marginalized women to safeguard their fundamental rights and to live a better quality of life, etc., etc. So these are basically the ideas, and this is
So
what ideas look like.
idea would be basically the opening argument.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, the headline that
Like
I
we are
gave.
just presenting a good stretched argument, like this is what the government thinks, or
Huh,
this is
so
what
I
the
basically gave the basic case line for both sides, and yep, Archie, your views are correct. Whatever you're writing in the chat, thank you. So what I said was basic case lines. How do you filter out the idea? जितना भी बकबक करा, उसमें से what am I trying to prove, कि मुझे at the end of the day क्या चाहता हूँ कि adjudicator believe कर ले, that A leads to B, or A is important because of B, or things like that. The claim that I want the judge to believe becomes my idea. The reasons that I give to make the judge believe that that claim is true becomes my analysis. That's how you will think of it.
so
So
like right now you gave reasons for why UCC should be implemented, okay, from the gov
hmm,
side. So वो analysis नहीं हो गया थोड़ा सा like कि मतलब
no,
like
no, not exactly, because what I so reason, because it's a list of reasons doesn't completely make it analysis. My argument was that what they
okay,
what
so
basically are.
analysis would be just proving how like why you
Yup,
should
yup.
UCC.
Proving the reasons. So what Archie wrote in the chat, that fundamental rights, right, like right to equality or things like that. My argument would then become, which is a reason why I want to implement UCC. One reason is that existence of UCC helps minorities within the minorities protect their fundamental rights. This becomes my idea. Whatever I say इसके around becomes my analysis, that this is why in status quo these people can't protect themselves because they are under their religious laws or community laws and things like that. In the event of UCC, what will happen? How does it give more power to UCC, and therefore that's better? All of this becomes my analysis, but my idea still remains what Archie typed in the chat, that fundamental rights, like UCC helps in protecting your fundamental rights. um Just before I take Archie's question, I'll take Nivesh's question. In easy language, relevance represents impact basically. In most cases, yes, but not always, because relevance includes impact, but relevance is a little broader term than impact. Okay? Because impact works only in consequential arguments. If you remember from the first workshop, I told you there are two types of arguments. There are impact based arguments or consequential arguments, which say that A lead to B and B is good or bad, therefore we should do A or not do A. Then there are principal arguments, which are independent of impacts, which means that they don't say that A will lead to B. They will just say that A is a principle. This principle is important uh, because of XYZ reason. In the other team's side, the other policy, like the policy violates this principle, and no matter how much impact it can bring, the violation of that principle means that this is a policy that should be rejected, or things like that. If I'm giving philosophical justification of a principle, explaining why that principle needs to be upheld in society as a value and why you cannot violate that principle, that also comes under relevance. Okay? So that is basically me telling the judge that, listen, sure, this other team can bring impacts to you, but my principle is also important because of so and so reason, and you should care about that principle. Therefore, that also comes under relevance. in debates you will make both types of arguments, impacts based arguments or principle arguments. More impacts than principles, because impacts are also relatively easy to think of and make and things like that. But yeah, impacts are a way of proving relevance. Mostly this is what you will do. The second thing is what comes in principal arguments. You explain the importance of a value or a principle, and that's how you prove its relevance. I hope that answers. Archie, you can unmute now and ask your question. Thank you, Nivesh.
Yeah, I was asking if my idea is like on UCC, if my idea is right to equality for everyone, then my analysis could be, for example, you can take the triple talaq matter. So can I give the real life example, like some woman A was divorced by her husband B, and this type of thing in evidence?
Yeah, you can give that as evidence. You can also give that, you can also analyze that thing, like your analysis can also go side by side, because जो मैंने बोला that some religions or communities have some laws and things like that, this analysis is working in the abstract. But if we put in that specific example and uska context in it, it grounds the situation to the real world. It makes the judges believe that, huh, this actually happens. And that example of triple talaq, for example, is something that makes the judge believe कि हाँ, this actually works. So my in this particular motion, my analysis can probably go side by side with the evidence. That's how I would do it in a normal debate. Right now, I refrain to do that just to explain the concept.
Okay,
But
okay.
yes, that definitely helps as evidence. And yeah. Uh, oh, sorry, Yatharth. Yes, आपने starting में बोला था that you're from your brother's account. Cool, cool. So, okay, so having been done with questions, we'll move to the next slide. Rebuttals. So now that we have discussed Pauna Ghanta on what an argument looks like, what constitutes an argument, what are the more important and less important parts of an argument, let's also talk about how you can rebut or how you should rebut arguments from the other side in a similar fashion. What to target in the other side's argument. So the other side will give 7 7-minute speeches. What part of those speeches do you need to target? So before we get into the table, there is a bullet on the top of the table. Rebuttals without analysis are responses, not advised. What I mean by this is that you need to think of rebuttals in the same way that you need to think of arguments. So if someone has given you a three-pronged argument of idea, analysis, evidence, or a two-pronged argument of idea and analysis, the rebuttal to that can't be a sassy one-liner response that disses the other team's idea but does nothing further. For example, some team says that क्या कहते हैं, कोई भी आर्ग्यूमेंट एक टीम ने बोला, उसने उसमें 2 मिनट स्पेंड किए एंड फालतू में नहीं किए, दे एक्चुअली गेव मल्टीपल लेयर्स ऑफ एनालिसिस to their idea and things like that. So it's a decently proven argument at that point. As op, I can't just say, Are, this is not true, you're lying, or things like that, or panel, this does not happen in the real world, and this happens in the real world. So A doesn't lead to B, A leads to C. Even if it's in Sundar words, it's still a response, it's not a rebuttal. Because in the same way that an idea in an argument needs analysis to prove itself, a response also needs analysis within it to for the judge to believe that acha, if Gav is saying that X A leads to B and op is saying that doesn't lead to B, A leads to C, then in the same way that in the argument construction stage a judge would require Gov to give analysis as to why A leads to B, why do you think, like, why should I believe that A leads to B? In a similar fashion, op ke rebuttal में भी judge will ask themselves the same question, that you are saying that A doesn't lead to B. Give me reasons why A doesn't lead to B. Or if you're saying A leads to C instead, give me why A leads to C instead and not B as Gov is telling me. So just in a similar fashion as arguments, rebuttals also need analysis. Rebuttals also need a similar amount of proving. So just because you're rebutting, don't feel that you can go get away with one-liner responses or rebuttals, because those are things that judges won't buy, because at the end of the day judges make notes, judges balance each side out. अच्छा गव ने एक चीज क्लेम की, ऑप ने दूसरी चीज क्लेम की, अब क्लेम्स दोनों हैं, बट किसको बिलीव करने का रीजन ज्यादा है मेरे पास. If your responses are one-liners and not much substantiated, a judge is more likely to feel that Gov gave me more or better reasons or explained in detail why something is likely to happen. Op did not give me counter reasons as much to believe that this will not happen. So as a judge, I'm more likely to side with Gov. So you have to think of rebuttals and put in the same effort in rebuttals as you do in your arguments. That's one thing that we need to get out of the way before we start into get into rebuttals. Sorry for the dogs again. मैं कुछ कर नहीं सकता. Cool. In the table you can see things like, basically I'm trying to explain to you through this table what happens when you target different parts of an argument and how much of an impact does it have on you winning that argument or losing that argument and things like that. First, let's deal with evidence. So the order from least to most important is evidence, analysis, idea. If you attack the evidence, it's a sort of a weak attack. If you attack the analysis, it's a decent attack. That's where most debates lie. If you attack the idea, that's the most fatal blow. But the thing is that ये directly proportional, sorry, ये बढ़ रहा है, but at the same time the ease of rebutting each level reduces, so it's inversely proportional. Evidence को attack करना is a weak strategy, but it's also the easiest strategy. The reason is Gov can point out a single country जहाँ पे ये policy implement हुई and ऐसा effect हुआ. Op can point out examples बथेरे पड़े हैं, ठीक है, न्यूज रोज आती है, आपको खुद दिमाग में एग्जांपल्स खूब सारे पड़े होंगे, 10-15 एग्जांपल्स होंगे, some of which favoring to Gov, some of which favoring to Op. Op can give another example and say that listen, तुमने ये एग्जांपल जो है जो हम दे रहे हैं, this is a scenario where what you said didn't happen, the opposite happened, and this disproves your argument. Doing that is weak, and I'll get into that why, but that is also the easiest strategy because examples are easily available and there is an abundance of examples in most cases, and there are different examples which play out in different ways, so you can pick and choose and things like that. That's the easiest way. Attacking analysis is not as easy as evidence, but it's not as tough as attacking ideas. The reason is most people get the right ideas, but what they struggle in is trying to prove the truth or relevance of those ideas, or like analyzing those ideas and making the judge believe that yes, this is what's going to happen, or this is why this is important. If you as the other team attack that analysis and show that why this analysis is insufficient, or provide counter analysis as to why something else will happen, or just some analysis that disproves their analysis, that is relatively more difficult than evidence. Obviously थोड़ा दिमाग लगेगा उसमें, in fact काफी लगेगा, but that also is stronger, that because evidence का अलग बात है, but analysis, now they have to bring up new analysis in their next speech, which like they can still do, but it's more difficult than evidence. Evidence में they can give you, they said one example, you said one example other जिसमें कुछ और हुआ था, they can bring a second example in the next speech and say that listen, ये दूसरा example हम ले आए, now our argument stands. So doesn't help you that much. Targeting analysis helps you a lot. Idea को target करना is the most fatal blow, because if idea is basically, जैसे हमने अभी पिछले slides में, you people asked questions of ideas on gov and op, and I gave you basic ideas जो कि मैं run करता उन debates में and things like that, ठीक है. So if some team defeats those ideas as a whole, that means that the foundation of my case or the foundation of my argument is broken. At that point मुझे वापस rebuild करना पड़ेगा that idea, or like I just have to in most cases come up with an entirely new idea. मेरा पूरा case ही खत्म कर दिया एक argument, एक rebuttal ने. That's the most fatal blow. So that is also the hardest thing to do, or the most difficult thing to do, because And this is why we tell you to be aware of different perspectives and be open minded and things like that, because some people might believe that X thing is a good thing, which might be the general perception in society. But if you want to target that idea, then you need to be aware of counter views which support the idea that X is a bad thing. That's when you'll be more capable of attacking ideas or more capable of giving better rebuttals to the other teams. Now let's take examples. Evidence. These are easier to tackle, but the other side can rebuild their case with better examples. Examples are anyway a very minor part of their arguments. Doesn't take much time to give out a new example and say कि अरे ये हो गया. Let's take an example. The motion is, this house regrets the rise of political consultancies. I'll just type it fully. Does anyone know what a political consultancy is before, like without using the internet? It's fine if you don't know. मुझे भी नहीं पता था. If you know, unmute and speak, or just try to think.
Help the politicians, I guess, in making their election manifesto and the campaign. If I'm not wrong.
Exactly. That's what a political consultancy does. Thank you, Harshit. So what a political consultancy does is basically exactly what Harshit said, that they assist political parties in campaigning, in their manifestos or in their PR stuff and things like that, so that they are able to build an image and they're able to garner votes, or just their political standing becomes stronger among the voter base and things like that. That's basically what political consultancies assist the political parties in. Now, this is a motion that Pratyush and I faced at a tournament in SRCC. I did not know what political consultancy meant, which is why I said that it's fine if you don't know. But the argument that we ran on Gov is that why do we regret the rise of political consultancies, right? Our idea was that, listen, there are parties with more resources, there are more established parties like BJP, Congress, etc. There are also less established parties with lesser resources like Aam Aadmi Party, like Trinamool Congress, or things like that. So our idea was that political consultancies are more likely to widen the gap between big and small parties. This was our idea. What was our analysis? Our analysis was that obviously political consultancies are profit-oriented entities. They are businesses at the end of the day who have incentive to operate in a manner that is profitable for them, which means they charge a hefty sum of money to assist any political party to help in their campaigning. Which are the political parties who can afford to pay those hefty sums of money to avail these services? These are the big parties. These are the parties that have resources or are well established and can spend crores of money on election campaigns and things like that. This means that, and these political consultancies are more likely to aid these big parties who are already so established in further strengthening their standing in the political scenario. And this is how this makes it even more difficult for small parties to fight the elections and things like that. This was an argument that we made. The idea was that political consultancies widen the gap between big and small parties. The analysis was that, जो भी मैंने अभी पिछले एक आध मिनट बकबक किया, idea was that in the absence of political consultancies, because these bigger parties won't have this additional aid, possibly the gap between big and small parties would have been lesser. This was the idea. If an opposition to this says that, so if you're talking about it, Indian context, the famous political consultancy or the topmost political consultancy is IPAC. I don't know if you know IPAC. प्रशांत किशोर का अगर नाम सुना हो किसी ने. एक सेकंड, आई जस्ट, हाँ सुना है ना, हर्षित ने सुना है. कूल कूल. सो आईपैक का फुल फॉर्म क्या है, एक सेकंड. Indian Political Action Committee. This is the full form of IPAC. So this is a well-established political consultancy firm in India. So yeah, Cambridge Analytica is something which is relevant here. Uh, Although I'm not sure if it's in this argument, but in the overall issue of political consultancies, it's definitely relevant. So, and I think Pratyush ran some argument related to that as well, as far as I can remember. Cool. So, if we're talking about my argument, and some opposition says that, ठीक है, तुमने बोला that political consultancies are likely to favor big parties and they have incentives to favor big parties and only help them and not the small parties. But evidence suggests otherwise. Prashant Kishore in India has helped Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi, which is a small party. Prashant Kishore and IPAC have also helped Trinamool Congress in Bengal, which is also a small party. Therefore, your argument is false. Obviously, I'm not saying that this won't have any impact. But the problem is, this attacks my argument in an evidence level, which means that my idea still stands, my analysis still stands. Sure, Prashant Kishore probably or IPAC in India probably supported smaller parties. But this debate is not just about IPAC or just about Prashant Kishore. This debate is about the larger trend of political consultancies, right? This debate is on a global level. अलग अलग countries में अलग अलग political consultancies होंगी जिनके अलग अलग incentives होंगे and they might support different parties. This example surely tells me one instance of where my analysis and idea did not work as I said it would work, but this gives the judge no reason to believe that in the vast majority of cases, political consultancies would favor the small party as well. So a judge would not credit, the judge would obviously take into account the example, but the judge would not make you win this particular clash just because you gave an example that Prashant Kishore ne to bhai small parties ko favor kiya. But that doesn't tell me why political consultancies in general are more likely to favor smaller parties, or ऐसा क्या incentive है to political consultancies that in most cases they also are okay with favoring smaller parties and things like that. As long as you don't give me analysis and you restrict your response or your rebuttal only to the evidence level, the judge would not give this debate, and for the judge the gov ka argument would still stand. So you need to give counter analysis of that idea if you want to prove कि नहीं smaller parties को भी support मिलता है because there is some other incentive apart from profit, or like profit भी हो जाता है, or any other reason. Analysis कुछ भी हो सकता है. Point is there should be analysis and like reasonable analysis to prove that the counter to what Gav is saying is true. कि smaller parties को भी support मिल सकता है. So you need analysis and you can't just target an argument on an evidence level and expect the judge to make you win the debate. That's for evidence level. Now coming to analysis. ठीक है. Now analysis, as I said, in analysis what you do is you target the logical links that a team makes in proving that something is going to happen or something is true and things like that. You question the assumptions that they have taken and you tell the judge why those assumptions might be false and are more likely to be false and things like that. These are analysis is relatively difficult to tackle, but to be very blunt and honest, if you want to even have a chance at winning a clash or an argument or a debate, the bare minimum for you to do is target the other side's analysis. Evidence का मैंने already बता रखा है why the likelihood of it is less of you winning the debate. The way also, I'm not saying that evidence isn't completely important. It's important, but if you target via evidence, along with citing this evidence that says otherwise and that disproves दूसरे side का argument, what you also need to do is analyze why the example that you gave is a more likely scenario than what the gov side is saying. गव ने बोला कि पॉलिटिकल कंसल्टेंसीज बड़े पार्टीज को ही फेवर करेंगी, ऑप बोलता है कि प्रशांत किशोर ने छोटे पार्टीज को भी फेवर किया. This much is not enough, but coupled with this evidence, if I also give analysis as to why political consultancies in general are more likely to support smaller parties as well, and that the example that you gave is a more likely scenario or the norm and not the exception, because examples can be exceptions. There is a norm in the society and there are exceptions to that norm. So most of the things happen as per the norm. Some things here and there happen away from the norm and are exceptions. If you're using examples, make sure you also do the additional legwork of telling why this example is likely to be the norm and not the exception. That's when your example becomes more viable, and that's when it is a stronger attack even on the example level. Okay. Coming to analysis. For analysis, let's take an example of deterrence via retribution. So there is a particular theme of debates called criminal justice system. This basically means what do we need to do with the criminal justice system? How should we treat crime and criminals? What measures should we take? So there are multiple approaches. One is retribution, which you are most likely aware of. कि criminals को jail में डालो पकड़ के and punish them, or like prisons में डालो, or in some cases even capital punishment, which is basically death penalty. Also, just a trigger warning here, we'll be talking about violence and crimes in the next 5 to 10 minutes, so just giving a trigger warning for that. Cool. Just a second. So the other approach is rehabilitation of criminals. So this punishment wala approach is basically called retribution. Retribution basically means punishment for doing something wrong. Rehabilitation is another approach in which the idea is that okay, this person is gonna be coming to prison for 5 years. We need to rehabilitate them. We need to make them a better person, so that when they go outside of that prison, when they step outside a better person than what they came in, so that they don't commit crimes again and they're a better person and things like that. That is what the rehabilitation approach looks like. So there are a lot of debates which involve clash between retribution and rehabilitation and things like that. Suppose there is a team in a debate which is trying to prove that retribution is good, and their idea is that punishment or retribution leads to deterrence. Deterrence, what does this mean? Deterrence means motivation to not do something or incentive to not do something. उनका आइडिया ये है कि punishment or retribution possibly leads to deterrence and therefore less crimes, because people would be scared and things like that. So their analysis can look like people, like when you increase punishment or when you have certain punishments set for certain crimes, people would know that if I get caught, this is the punishment I will face. This punishment will create fear in the minds of people, and therefore they are less likely to commit crimes, and therefore this is how having a punishment leads to deterrence and leads to reduction of crimes or prevention of crimes and things like that. Maybe this is what an argument in support of retribution and deterrence looks like. If I'm opposing this argument, if I'm giving evidence that listen, this is a country where there is capital punishment for a particular crime, let's say sexual violence or sexual assault, there is capital punishment for this thing, there is still a lot of the crime rates are still not falling in this country, and the crime rate is still high. The sexual assault rates are still high in this country. This is me targeting this argument on an evidence level. Now sure, this is a strong push, and in criminal justice debates this is a very stuck or a very overused clash and things like that. So obviously this attack holds some weight, but it's still at the evidence level. How can it be a stronger rebuttal? I can target this instead on an analysis level and say that listen, your idea is that people will think of the consequences of their acts and therefore choose not to perform those acts because it would lead to bad consequences. But what you assume, and this is me targeting their logical links and their assumptions, what you assume is that the criminal before or while committing the crime is in a rational state of mind. What do I mean by this? You assume that the criminal takes into account all consequences. The criminal thinks rationally as to अच्छा मैं ये करूँगा तो इसका ये परिणाम होगा, and therefore I should not do this. You assume that the criminal goes through that thinking process. But mera rebuttal ka analysis is that this actually isn't the case in many times, right? If we talk about crimes of passion, for example, murder or sexual assault or things like that, in most cases, criminals don't go through this rational process. Criminals don't think of consequences and they just commit the act because they want to commit that crime and things like that. And it's a fucked up thing, but they do. Okay. And criminals don't like go through that rational process. I would argue in a rebuttal that एक सेकंड भूल गया मैं fuck. This is basically it that the criminal doesn't go through that rational thinking process, and the criminal in many times doesn't even think that they're gonna get caught. Uh, kind of, I think, yeah, maybe. मतलब cold blood murder भी passion से हो सकता है, but हाँ, the heat of the moment thing is actually what I'm talking about. That you don't rationally think about things, but you just commit a crime because you want to commit a crime. That I think that puts it in better words, heat of the moment. So scene ये है कि this criminal is not going through a rational thinking process most of the times. This criminal probably in most cases believes that I won't get caught only. So मेरे को consequences के चिंता करने की जरूरत ही नहीं है. At that point, no matter how big of a punishment you have, even if you have a death penalty, your policy of retribution is not likely to work. So their idea was that retribution leads to deterrence. Basically, punishment leads to reduction of crime, which is their idea. Their analysis is that people will think rationally of the consequences and that will prevent them from doing that. My response targets the analysis that no, people will not think rationally. People do things in heat of the moment, as Gurmeet said, and people will uh, not even think that they're gonna get caught. So no matter how high the punishment is, your idea, like your analysis doesn't hold true, because I have proven through the analysis in my rebuttal that crime rates are still gonna be high. So your analysis of deterrence falls. अगर मैंने ये response दे दिया है, this is a very good blow to the argument of deterrence. After this point, in the subsequent speech, this team that is supporting the deterrence argument, they will have to bring new analysis or rebuild their own analysis or like do anything to further make the judge believe that nahi, deterrence still hota hai. These are the additional reasons why our idea is still true. But what you do is you put the other side in a difficult position. Now it's possible that they have 2 to 3 lines of analysis. तुमने दो को टारगेट किया, उन्होंने तीसरी अगली स्पीच में आके बोल दी. But in most cases, if you target analysis, it eats up a chunk of their argumentation. If the other side does not have more levels of analysis to support that, and jitna tha utna aap kha gaye, that means that you have sufficiently defeated the other side's argument, and that's a good thing that you've done in a debate, and you have decent chances of winning that clash. This is me targeting the analysis level of someone's argument. Now let's talk about idea level. Most fatal blow. ठीक है. These इसके लिए एग्जांपल लेते हैं privacy versus national security. So this is a clash that comes up a lot in debates about state के पास क्या क्या power होनी चाहिए and how much can state do surveillance of citizens and things like that. So if there's a motion which says that uh, basically that states are okay in doing surveillance for national security purposes and breaching the privacy of its citizens and things like that. अगर इस टाइप का कोई motion है and I am on the side which supports privacy, the other side they are probably proving that listen, breach of privacy ठीक है, but एक सेकंड, हाँ, breach of privacy कोई बात नहीं, but as long as this leads to national security, like our measures or the things that government does via this surveillance on citizens, if it leads to national security and keeps the citizens safe, it's a good thing and we should support that. I have two ways I can target this. जैसे मैंने पिछले वाले में analysis versus example target करके दिखाया and told you how analysis is stronger, यहाँ पे मैं idea versus analysis पे target करके दिखाऊंगा and I'll tell you how idea is stronger. I'll first target the analysis. अगर कोई साइड बोलती है कि national security, we think that more surveillance on citizens will create national security because of XYZ reasons. I target those XYZ reasons. I say that, listen, here in my rebuttal, I'll tell you counter analysis as to why these XYZ reasons don't work, and this is why breaching of privacy doesn't lead to national security. But here, the reason why this is still a weaker response to idea का मैं बाद में बताऊंगा, but I'll tell you what the other side can do. The other side can target your rebuttal, bring in further analysis or new analysis, and say कि भाई ये हमने new analysis दिया of how national security is still something that and still an outcome or an impact that we can achieve. Now our argument is again whole. अब उन दूसरी साइड या मेरी साइड वापस वीक हो गई. But instead of this, if I target the idea, if I say that no matter how much impact you can achieve, even if we agree with their analysis that you will achieve national security or the safety of citizens, I target the idea because implicit in your benefit is the idea that national security is more important than privacy, or it's okay to breach privacy over national security. If I target that implicit idea in and of itself, and I give so good analysis of the right to privacy that makes the judge believe that, listen, right to privacy is a very fundamental right that you should respect at all costs, and there is no amount of security that can uh, justify you breaching that right to privacy. At that point, I have broken that idea of the other side's case that national security is more important than privacy, because I've proved the converse of that idea or the opposite of that idea, that no, even if you can achieve national security, here I'm not targeting the analysis. I'm saying that हाँ, तुम जो privacy breach कर रहे हो उससे achieve कर लोगे तुम national security. People will be safe. Analysis is still intact. But I target the idea that national security is not important if it comes at the cost of breaching privacy through some philosophical justification of right to privacy as to how it's important for you and it's close to your personhood, and if you don't have the right to privacy then you don't have a meaningful life and things like that. कुछ भी हो सकता है. If I target the idea of national security, this means that their whole argument falls flat because analysis को मैंने target ही नहीं किया, but now the analysis becomes irrelevant even though it's proven, because now अब to to have to have value in that analysis, the national security wala side would have to come back and prove that no, national security is still more important than privacy, which means they have to rebuild their idea. That is why I talk about the most fatal blow in the argument. So this is basically what targeting the idea looks like. I hope the difference between targeting evidence, analysis, idea, etc. is clear enough after this slide. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the last slide? Cool. I'm assuming there are no questions. I'll just move on to the last slide. अच्छा, मैंने बोला था कि मैं वो डिबेट जो भेजी उसका एग्जांपल दूंगा तुम्हें, बट मैं देना भूल गया. So before the last slide, let's just get back to that. This slide, truth and relevance. So if those of you who have watched the debate that Sahaj or Vrinda sent on the group, think about what Gov and Op said. ठीक है. If we're talking about relevance, the Op side said कि मतलब तुम बैकपैकिंग करके बस दुनिया घूमने चले जाओगे and things like that, and we don't think that should be the narrative for happiness and things like that. What Gov said in response to this is that devaluing your professional stability doesn't mean backpacking and traveling the world. We're talking about professional stability here. This means that you can change your careers, or you don't have to stick to one career of being a lawyer for like 30-40 years. You can be a lawyer in one for a few years, then you can be a farmer or things like that, anything. This is what we mean by professional stability, and not the backpacking, etc., and travel the world wala characterization that came from op. By this, what Gov did is disprove the relevance of op ka claim, or at least attempted to do. I'm not saying that for me Gov won or op won. I haven't seen the debate from that perspective. I just saw it in a perspective that to introduce people to parliamentary debating, is this a simple enough and a good enough debate? So उस perspective से देखा, I didn't see it from a judge का perspective, although I usually do. So don't ask me who won according to me. I haven't decided. आप अपना बता सकते हो chat में जब चाहो. But talking about truth and relevance. So what happened in that debate is Gov said कि sure, backpacking वगैरह is not a legitimate pursuit of happiness, and we don't want people to feel pressured into adopting that lifestyle to pursue happiness or things like that. But that argumentation from up, even if it is true, it's not relevant. The reason is because devaluing your professional stability doesn't equal to backpacking and traveling the world. It equals to you having different careers in your life and not the same career for your whole life and things like that. This is why, because op imagined this motion in a wrong way, even if what they are saying is true, is not relevant to the motion at hand, because this is not exactly the thing that we're talking about in this debate. I hope those who watched the debate, this truth and relevance part is clearer now. Similarly, for truth, you might have noticed that both sides were discussing what is the narrative or what is the dominant narrative in the world or in the society right now. So, narrative basically means a widespread notion in society or a belief in society. Like things like अच्छे के साथ अच्छा होता है, or everything happens for a reason and things like that. These are some examples of narratives in society that majority of people tend to believe. ठीक है? This is what I mean by narrative. In the debate, you might have noticed both sides were trying to prove that. So Gov was trying to prove that professional stability or having a stable job is the dominant narrative in let's say the pursuit of happiness. That the society believes that अगर आपके पास एक stable high paying job है, that is the dominant way in which the society thinks that most of the people think that this is what will give you happiness. Op said as a response to this that no, even so this is a relevant thing. What is the dominant narrative in the society is a relevant thing. So op didn't question the relevance of it, but op questioned the truth of this by saying that no, this is, we reject the idea that this is the dominant narrative. We say that the dominant narrative in society is backpacking, or like this lawyer who left their 9 to 5 job and followed their passion and things like that. That's still a relevant thing. Following your passion or things like that is not in the ambit of professional stability. So there, what opposition tried to do is they agree that they are relevant, but they question the truth of the claim of Gov, that no, this is not the dominant narrative. Gov is lying to you. We think the dominant narrative is these big shot lawyers or investment bankers after 5-10 years leaving their job and following their passion, and by that they try to argue that this is something that only the privileged or the wealthy people can do, and this cannot work for the average or marginalized people and things like that. So this is how they try to target the truth of Gov's argument. So I hope truth and relevance are clear with this example. Okay, now coming to the last slide. Common flaws with arguments that you will obviously not make, or in most cases should not make. So there are these many flaws. I'll talk about all of them one by one. First flaw is assertion. Assertions are statements without analysis. This is basically when I said you need to rebut the other side and not respond to the other side, which means that a rebuttal without analysis is a response. In the similar fashion, when we're talking about arguments, and an argument without analysis is an assertion. Keep this thing in mind. So another way of saying that idea, analysis, evidence, another way of saying this is assertion, reasoning, example. You have an assertion which is a statement you have reasoning which proves that assertion is true, you have evidence to support your assertion and your reasoning. This is basically the same model of reasoning, right? Just different names for different stages. So without analysis, these statements are just assertions. Assertions are not appreciated by edges or by other teams. If you make assertions in debates, or if you don't have analysis in your arguments, it becomes very easy for the other side to say that, panel, this argument lacks analysis, therefore it's an assertion, which means this is you they have not given any reason to make you believe that this is true or prove that this is true. At which point you should not give credit to that argument because it's simply an assertion. This is a common flaw with argumentation that you will not commit. The second thing is contradiction. Contradiction, I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. If you have two different arguments, your one argument should not contradict your other arguments. Let in one argument you're saying A leads to B, but the other argument says that no, A won't lead to B, but A will lead to C. That confuses the judge as to which argument we should buy. Will B happen or will B not happen? At that point, your case takes a major blow, and the other side can weaponize the shit out of it, and in most cases have a bigger chance to defeat you. So you do have to make sure that your ideas or your analysis are not contradictory, or your lines of reasoning are not contradictory to one another. The third thing is casual causation or faulty or incomplete analysis. This is a different form of the first thing, in the sense that in the first thing you have zero analysis, or you have very little or little to no analysis. ठीक है? In casual causation, you have some level of analysis, but it seems like तुम जब argument बना रहे होते हो तब you feel like, okay, I have made this particular argument, but it's actually not enough to prove that argument. So you can see a motion in the example. This house would tax Zara for flouting environmental laws. Zara is a fashion company, I think. So the motion is that this house would tax Zara for flouting or breaking environmental laws or violating environmental laws. Take a minute and think from Gov's perspective. What are the arguments that you would run? Think for a minute. Type in the chat as soon as you think your idea and analysis are complete.
Can you just repeat it once? Internet issues. Like, what do we have to do? Just repeat that.
You have to make arguments for the Gov side of the motion on the screen. You have to support taxing Zara for flouting environmental laws. What will happen if you tax Zara? Why is it a good thing? Just think of it and explain. I'll just go to the washroom. मैं अभी आता हूँ. तब तक तुम सोचो. Okay, do responses. Okay, use of animal leather for making of clothes, usage of toxic chemicals for mass production of apparel. ठीक है. Uh, you're going in the right line, but this doesn't form a complete coherent argument. I want to know from Gov's perspective, what do you think will happen when you tax Zara? Yathard says can give evidences as facts that it's not following government norms. Mhm. That's true. That's the problem in that this debate tries to address, that they are not following environmental guidelines or laws. What will happen when they tax Zara? Hmm. They might implement sustainability measures. ठीक है. Bright line. Cool. ठीक है. So the basic idea here is, in case anyone is typing, you can send. अगर अभी तक सोच रहे हो तो you can stop thinking. I think we've had a couple of minutes for that. Okay, so the basic gov case that usually is comes to mind in this debate is that, listen, the problem that this debate tries to identify or solve is that Zara is flouting environmental laws. What do we do to stop that, or what do we do to reduce that? Yup, exactly what Vritti said. By taxation, their revenues will decline and they will alter their production method. Yup. So that is basically the idea or the argument that usually governments try to run in this debate, right? The argument goes like this: taxation is an additional amount of money that Zara would have to pay, which would reduce their profits or things like that, exactly what Vritti said. And therefore, to avoid that loss or to avoid paying those taxes, they would likely make policies which they would likely alter their production method basically, and would have sustainable methods and things like that. Huh, what Savya said. Yup. So yeah, so now all of you have gotten the basic argument. This is what a gov says, for example. Now this the idea here is that uh, taxation creates a disincentive for Zara to flout environmental laws, or creates an incentive for Zara or motivates Zara to not flout environmental laws. This is basically the argument from Gov. Yep, Krishna, that is an example. Yep. So now you all can stop typing. So this is basically the argument from Gov, that through taxing you would motivate or incentivize Zara to not flout environmental laws and therefore reduce environmental pollution or harmful practices and things like that. Now, as opposition, someone can say that, listen, Zara is a big fucking company. Zara has crores or millions of money in it and things like that. What this taxation does is just come up with another few, like a small amount of money that they have to pay over and above the usual taxes that they pay, which means that because it's such a big company, what this leads to is not Zara adopting their different production method, which is not bad for environment, but Zara continuing that thing, and Zara continuing environmental laws, just that they have to pay a fine for that, and they just continue paying that, and they don't alter their production. They continue with flouting environmental laws, or, and worse, what happens is that they push the burden of these taxes on the consumers or on the workers. To compensate for that tax ka revenue loss, they might reduce the salaries of their laborers or workers or employees, which is bad for those employees. They might increase the prices of their products, which is bad for consumers. And that's how these are the different things that can happen, or different ways this scenario can play out, and it's more likely to happen. None of them involve Zara even touching their production process. They still continue flouting environmental laws. It's just worse for other people involved in the grand scheme of things. What the opposition has done here is point out the casual causation from side government. The problem here, and I'm not saying that you have bad arguments. That's literally the usual argument that is supposed to be run. The thing is, and I deliberately stopped you at this level because this is where usually novice debaters stop and don't further analyze their arguments. The point here is that no matter which side you're on, you have to think and analyze your arguments a lot and make sure that that analysis actually proves your arguments. Perform circumvention and bluffing, हाँ कुछ भी हो सकता है, ये सब चीजें हो सकती हैं. So what OP has pointed out is that, listen panel, there is a level of casual causation given by Gov, which means that ये casually कह रहे हैं कि हाँ A will lead to B and थोड़ा बहुत reason दे रहे हैं कि incentive change हो जाएगा and things like that. But we have shown you through our more analyzed rebuttal that is not likely to be the case, and that Zara can do this other thing or that other thing instead of changing their production method to align with the laws, and they will still continue flouting laws. And तुम्हारा benefit ये था कि Zara will stop flouting laws, which you don't achieve because of XYZ things that they can do as a result of that taxation. This means that OP pointed out that you assumed that Zara would behave in a certain way or respond in a certain way to a certain thing that is imposed on them. Why can't they behave in some other way or things like that? That is not something that Gov argument took into account when Gov came up with this analysis. This is basically an example of casual causation. So in any debate, make sure that just because you have some lines of analysis doesn't make it a complete argument. It still might be a case of casual causation. Be more critical of your arguments when you think of them. Be more critical of your analysis. Even if you have ekad line of analysis, try to think of other reasons or more reasons that you can bring in support of an idea to make your argument more airtight and लेस प्रोन टू अटैक बाय अदर साइड, बिकॉज जितना स्ट्रांग आपका आर्ग्यूमेंट होगा उतनी मेहनत दूसरी साइड को करनी पड़ेगी टू ब्रेक डाउन दैट आर्ग्यूमेंट. इफ योर आर्ग्यूमेंट इज जस्ट ऑन एन एविडेंस लेवल, फॉर एग्जाम्पल मैंने ऑलरेडी बोला एविडेंस इज इजिएस्ट टू टैकल. इफ योर आइडिया इज दैट रेट्रीब्यूशन होना चाहिए बिकॉज एक्स कंट्री में हार्श पनिशमेंट है एंड क्राइम रेट्स लो है, the like all that the other team needs to do is to come up and say in 10 seconds that why country में punishment harsh है but crime rate still high है. That defeats your evidence. But if you have good analysis and good ideas, that takes longer time and that takes more mental capacity for the other side to think to disprove, and more time and more mehnat for the other side to defeat. Taking taxation made to be a media as big company make an impact on people who buy from it, maybe Saxena could also add for Gov. Possibly yes, this is a line of questioning that taxing Zara would mean that this issue comes to light and people actually realize the bad practices that Zara is practicing. But on the other hand, there's also the idea that Zara is also a big company and also has PR machineries which are strong and manipulate or like control the public's narrative, and they would probably shut media companies or like they somewhat have a control on societal narrative which makes call out for big companies difficult and things like that. So कुछ भी हो सकता है, not bought by commoners. हाँ मतलब महंगे तो होते हैं, मैंने आई डोंट थिंक मैंने कभी खरीदा है, बट हाँ जो भी. So it can go either way. I'm not saying यथार्थ तुम्हारा argument गलत है. I'm just giving a possible response to that argument that दूसरी side ये भी कह सकती है, which is why whenever you think of any argument, also think of gaps that you can identify, or like just think from the other side's perspective, that if you were on the other side, how would you attack that argument? Then come back to your own perspective, think ways in which you can protect your argument from those lines of attack and things like that. That way you would be more prepared for a debate rather than just अपने ही point of view में thinking your arguments and not thinking of other side. हाँ ये भी बात है, but चलो ठीक है, this discussion is now going on a different tangent. We have already spent so much time on this, so this is enough to explain casual causation. Next is false dichotomy. What is a false dichotomy? Dichotomy means a choice that you have to make between two things. Di means do, and so dichotomy means a choice between two things. So A or B. There is no C. There is not a third thing that you can choose to do. you have to only choose between two things. That's what a dichotomy means. Now, what does a false dichotomy mean? A false dichotomy means a team trying to run an argument which says that if you are opposing A, then you necessarily need to do B, and B is bad. This team is restricting the debate to just two options, when in actuality there might be a third option or a fourth option which this other team can defend. But just because B is the option that is most favorable to this side, this is saying that B तो सबसे घटिया option है, and if you're opposing A, then B is the only thing that you can do, and this is bad, and therefore we win this debate. The other time can call out this false dichotomy and say that no, it's not a choice between just two things. There are multiple things that we can do regarding this issue. We can do A, we can do B, we can do C. We think that we can do C, and C is not as bad as B, so your line of attack basically isn't that strong on us. So, for example, in policy motions, right? In policy motions, just explaining in short, so Gov has to defend the policy, right? If the argument is this house would ban drugs, Gov has to defend banning of drugs. Now, Gov can't say that Op has to defend the current world or the status quo जहाँ पे drugs पे कोई control नहीं है, for example, या कुछ भी ऐसा. If the Gov side looks like banning drugs, the Op side doesn't have to look like complete free availability of drugs या कोई restriction नहीं है, कोई भी drug खरीद सकता है, consume कर सकता है. Op can have a third option where they can regulate drugs without banning them. That sure, Op pay drugs can be available in the market, but there will be certain restrictions that they would put, that only people above this age can consume drugs, or that this is the maximum quantity of drugs that you can buy, or things like that. So this is a third option that can be there, and Gov can't say that Op पे बिल्कुल control नहीं होगा, and Op has to defend the worst case जहाँ पे मतलब you're basically making drugs available for everyone and free flow of drugs here. These are not the only two options in this debate, like banning drugs versus free flow of drugs. There is a third, which is regulation of drugs, which is somewhat of a middle ground and things like that. This is what a false dichotomy in an actual debate looks like. So you have to be careful that first, you are not running a false dichotomy. You need to read the motion carefully and understand the implications of that motion carefully to identify for yourself whether this motion implies a false dichotomy or not. So, for example, if a motion is that, imagine that there is this world A. World A is one where people don't have the ability to lie. ठीक है? Assume करो कि ऐसा एक world है. The motion can be this house prefers world A. This is a clear dichotomy. This is a true dichotomy, which means that, or like the motion is this house prefers world A over status quo. Either way, there are only two options in front of you. Either this imaginary world where people don't have the ability to lie, or the current world where people have the ability to lie. There is no third world. This is a true dichotomy. Whereas in the earlier motion, this house would ban drugs, there is no dichotomy. Op can do things other than banning drugs as well, and they don't have to be settled with not doing anything about drugs. That if a team tries to tell you that you cannot regulate drugs and you have to defend free flow of drugs and things like that, that's a false dichotomy. Two things that you need to think from your own argument's perspective. Make sure that you are not running a false dichotomy, because if your argument is dependent on that and the other times comes up with a third option which you had not thought of was possible, and this other side says that अरे हम तो ये भी कर सकते हैं अब बोलो, your argument basically becomes irrelevant. You have to give new responses in your next speech to that third option. So this is bad for you when you're arguing. In terms of other teams arguing, you need to be aware of this common flaw of argument, because a lot of times other teams will also try to do this. You need to be smart about it and cognizant about it and realize when this is happening from another side, and you have to call out when that happens, so that the judge doesn't actually believe that this debate is a binary or a dichotomy. The judge knows that there are more than two options in this debate. binary is another word for dichotomy, by the way. So if someone is trying to impose this binary on you, you have to be clear and explicit in calling out that this debate is not a binary. There are more than two options available, and we can choose to do more than two things. This is false dichotomy. The last common flaw with arguments is straw manning. Straw manning means responding to made up arguments, which means that दूसरी साइड ने कोई लाइन ऑफ आर्ग्यूमेंटेशन नहीं रन किया है जो मैंने सोचा था कि वो रन करेंगे, बट मैं स्टिल उसको रिबट कर रहा हूँ. मैं बोल रहा हूँ अपनी स्पीच में कि द अदर साइड सेड ये चीज, एंड दीज आर आर रिस्पॉन्सेज टू दिस थिंग, एंड देयरफॉर वी विन दिस डिबेट. This is unethical, and this is not an honest or an honorable way of debating, because you're basically lying because the other side did not run that argument. तुम ये इसलिए कर रहे हो स्ट्रॉ मैनिंग बिकॉज तुम्हारे पास उनकी एक्चुअल आर्ग्यूमेंट के रिबटल नहीं थे, बट यू हैड थॉट ऑफ रिबटल्स फॉर सम अदर आर्ग्यूमेंट. तो तुम्हें जबरदस्ती वो रिबटल्स घुसाने थे किसी ना किसी तरीके से, एंड तुमने वो ले आए डिबेट में कि नहीं नहीं, दिस इज व्हाट दिस साइड इज सेइंग, एंड दीज आर आर रिस्पॉन्सेज टू दैट line of argumentation, and therefore that team is losing. But if in reality that's not happening, that's not the right way to debate. The right way to debate is to actually deal with what the other side is saying, and पहले तो understand truly what this side is saying, not misrepresent their arguments, and take them at their like best, and like think ki acha, this is what they're actually saying, state that in short, and then target that line of argumentation. That's when you're honest in that engagement, that's when it becomes a more fruitful debate, and you anyway have more chances of winning the debate, because judges take note, so they can see whether this team has made this argument or did they mean something else by this argument, or the other team can call out that ये तो हमने बोला नहीं था, तुमने misunderstand किया, this is what we mean to say. और वर्स तुमने स्ट्रॉमैन किया तो तुम अनएथिकल कर रहे हो, दिस इज व्हाट वी मीन टू से, एंड यू हैव नॉट रिस्पॉन्डेड टू द ओरिजिनल आर्ग्यूमेंट. So this is what we mean by straw manning. This is also, so for all of these common flaws with arguments, there are two things that you need to keep in mind. Firstly, be careful that you don't commit those flaws. Secondly, be careful that if the other side is committing those flaws, weaponize that to use that against them. So this was all about common flaws with arguments, and this was basically all about the workshop. Now it comes to an end. I am stopping the recording now. In case anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in chat or by unmuting.